pressure tonight for Governor Josh Stein as a bill to toughen violent crime penalties sits on his desk. Now the NAACP is telling Stein not to sign it. Thank you for joining us for the news at 10. I'm Morgan Fogarty.
I'm Gary Brode. This comes as we wait to hear from CATS tomorrow on its plan to make the light rail safer after that brutal murder of Iryna Zarutska. A death that changed Charlotte, maybe forever. More than a month after the heinous murder of Iryna Zarutska on the light rail, a bill named Iryna's Law sits on Governor Josh Stein's desk. Some are hoping it doesn't get signed.
We're asking the governor to veto the bill because it is a reactionary, not a reformative bill.
North Carolina NAACP President Deborah Dix Maxwell wants to see public safety reinvented with more emphasis on mental health.
We have to be better in North Carolina. Set an example and show that we can be fair in sentencing, fair in providing mental health services, and be just about it.
Iryna's Law requires judges and magistrates to consider a person's mental state before deciding bail. The bill also eliminates cashless bail for certain offenses and will make it more difficult for violent and repeat offenders to get out of jail while they await trial.
Boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy, oh boy. So we got to go out to Clown World, North Carolina, which apparently is Charlotte, which, by the way, it's a very cloudy and cold day in Charlotte. But Clown World here, Democrats are upset because of the fact that Republicans are making them be tough on crime. That is not exaggeration. That's not a lie. That's not hyperbole. That's not a joke. That's real.
Anti-crime legislation named after Iryna Zarutska will go into effect this Monday. Zarutska was stabbed to death in August while riding Charlotte's light rail in Southend. Thanks for joining us for Queen City News after the football game. I'm Brian Blakely. As chief political correspondent Andy Weber reports, some local leaders are now worried they'll struggle to implement the law.
While Democrats took issue with some parts of the bill when it was passed by the General Assembly back in late September, it had bipartisan support because of some of the changes that were made to the criminal justice system. However, now leaders here in Mecklenburg County, like the sheriff, worry these changes will push the system to its limits.
You have a chance today to stop it and to stand up for not just Iryna, but for so many others.
Back in September, lawmakers in Raleigh passed legislation that the state's GOP promised would be tough on crime. The bill, Iryna's Law, named after Iryna Zarutska, who was stabbed to death on Charlotte's light rail, made several changes, including banning cashless bail for certain violent crimes and repeat offenders, limiting how often judges can allow pretrial release, and requiring more defendants to receive mental health evaluations.
If you can find a policy that will help fill vacancies, and you find a policy that produces funding, that is what the sheriff needs. Okay. Policies don't fill vacancies. Policies don't fill funding.
But this week, Mecklenburg County Sheriff Gary McFadden told county commissioners the legislation will increase the workload for an agency already being pushed to its limits. He says his office will need funding for more staffing.
You're talking about funding for additional medical, and we haven't even talked about the mental capacity of functioning, to give them the resources that they need, and then transporting them to these additional hearings beyond what we transport now.
Right, Democrats in Charlotte currently are in full-blown panic over having to be tough on crime, to lock up more criminals, okay? Because Republicans forced the state to pass Iryna's Law, which is in response to the murder of Iryna Zarutska on the Charlotte light rail, okay, by a deranged lunatic, right, who had mental health issues. This law is meant to protect law-abiding citizens, to protect individuals like Iryna Zarutska, who did not deserve to lose her life in the way that she did, okay? At the high level, it makes it much harder for people accused of serious violent crimes to be released pre-trial. It builds in more mandatory mental health evaluations / involuntary commitment triggers. Attempts to restart and speed up the death penalty in North Carolina adds an aggravating factor when the victim is on public transit, tightens oversight of magistrates, and funds more prosecutors. So basically what you have here are changes to bail and pretrial release. Okay, so you have tougher rules for violent offenses. They just can't play catch and release anymore. Okay, they're also ending a written promise to appear for certain crimes. Okay, so basically for certain crimes, you can't just promise the judge that, hey, yeah, I'm gonna come back, right? I promise you, wink and a nod. Okay, no, there has to be stricter conditions on some of these individuals, or they have to stay locked up. Law enforcement must also tell judges about dangerous behavior. Okay, so more information is required to be disclosed to judges who are making decisions about whether or not these individuals should be released. You have less discretion for magistrates and more for judges. You have mental health and involuntary commitment changes, where basically there's a new pretrial procedure where judicial officials must initiate involuntary commitment proceedings if they find a defendant appears mentally ill and dangerous under certain criteria. So basically, this is designed to stop crime, right? It is comprehensive criminal justice reform in the way of actually, again, being tougher on crime instead of softer on crime, getting some of these mentally ill people who have committed violent acts off the streets and not allowing violent criminals to be caught and released, okay? And Democrats are boohoo-whining and crying about this because they're claiming that they don't have enough resources to lock people up. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into this.
CMPD has released body camera video that shows an interaction with the man who would months later be accused of killing a woman on the light rail.
I think I spoke with you before about this. You think you got somebody inside controlling you, right?
And in this video, you see first officers responding to DeCarlos Brown outside of a hospital and talking to him for about 25 minutes as they say he appeared to be going through a mental health challenge. Brown appears to walk away agitated. Police say at that point he called 911 again. More officers then arrived and eventually arrested Brown for misusing 911. Brown faced a magistrate in court and was allowed to be released from jail by promising to appear at his next court appearance. Well, 7 months after that, he was then accused of killing this woman, Iryna Zarutska, on Charlotte's light rail.
Yeah, so you seen that, you heard that. Now, I've went over all of the changes in this bill and all of the changes to the laws align with preventing what we saw happen with Iryna Zarutska, okay? So basically preventing people like this guy who was mentally ill, who had multiple arrests, had a history of committing violent acts, preventing people like him from being able to stay on the streets, okay? Preventing people like him from being able to stab young women to death in cold blood on public transit. So I just want people to understand the changes in the bill and why they're being made is because the lawmakers followed what happened, identified the root causes of why it happened, and they said, okay, we're going to make these changes in order to prevent this from happening in the future.
State leaders then passed a law that will now no longer allow suspects to be able to get out of jail without bond. That law takes into effect on Monday, but as Channel 9's Joe Bruno learned today, local leaders are concerned. Joe, they think this could lead to some different problems.
Well, Mecklenburg County officials are preparing for more people to be held inside the jail for longer periods of time. They are worried, though, that this is an unfunded mandate. State lawmakers passed sweeping criminal justice changes after Iryna Zarutska was stabbed to death on the light rail in August.
It's scary for me to read sometimes. I'm like, how did they get out? And so I believe they had good intentions.
The lawmakers cracked down on repeat offenders and got rid of written promises to appear, which is what Zarutska's murder suspect, DeCarlos Brown, was released on months before the murder. The law goes into effect Monday, and county commissioners are expecting a big impact.
I'm almost speechless about the impacts to across the board here.
I see a backlog happening as a result of these arrests not being able to move people out of the system.
Chief Judge Roy Wiggins says his judges and magistrates have been trained on the new law, and he believes they are ready. First appearances will likely get longer. Judicial officials also will have to consider a suspect's criminal history when granting pretrial release, and will have to enter a written finding of fact if they do so.
Sheriff Gary McFadden expects more people will be held in jail and for a longer period of time. He's worried about staffing.
Each dorm or pod room has to have a body. So when we talk about capacity, we could deal with it, but we have to have the staff to manage it.
Okay, I understand that. So hire more staff. It's really that simple, right? Hire more staff, get more bodies. People need jobs, right? People need jobs. A great job is to help lock up criminals. That's an amazing job that local governments should be funding, right? Again, these people can find funding for all types of crazy stuff. They can find funding for illegals. They can find funding for DEI. They can find funding for all types of liberal projects that don't add any value to society. But when it comes to actually locking up criminals, all of a sudden, oh, we got issues with funding. We have issues with resources. We can't afford to lock up the criminals. But you can afford everything else. You can afford everything else, but you can't afford to lock up the criminals? Make it make sense. I don't want to hear anything about we can't afford it. You can afford it. Find the funding. Cut some of these salaries of these Democrats, right? Of these individuals running the city into the ground. Cut some salaries, okay? Cut some of the pork, the fat, some of these unnecessary programs. Cut funding for illegals and use that funding to lock up the criminals. You got the funds. You just got to be willing to find it. That's the reality of the situation.
If you are charged with a violent crime or you are convicted of at least 3 crimes in the past 10 years, you will no longer be able to get an unsecured bond. And this is not just a Mecklenburg County issue. Counties across the state are preparing for Iryna's law to go into effect. Alamance County is seen as one of ICE's top allies in the state. They recently had to end their contract with ICE to house inmates there because they need that space now due to the expected increase of offenders due to Iryna's law. Reporting live outside the Government Center, Joe Bruno, Channel 9 Eyewitness News.
Thank you, Joe. Now, there are no Republicans currently serving on the Mecklenburg County Commission, but they say Iryna's law passed with bipartisan support and Governor Stein signed it into law. Representative and Republican Tricia Cotham at the state, she was one of the bill's chief architects. She says that this will eliminate catch and release practices for violent offenders.
Yeah, it's just common sense. It's just common sense. Apparently to everybody except Democrats and the NAACP, which, by the way, again, they're against this, right? They're upset. They're mad because they believe more black people will be locked up, right? This is going to lead to more racism, okay? This is what they're upset about. They have no concern whatsoever over the fact that people are losing their lives due to violent criminals who should be locked up, who should be put in mental institutions, walking around on the street, antagonizing people, being agents of chaos, right? And yeah, I think that stories like this are a great example of why voting at the local level matters, okay? The Republicans basically forced Democrats to get on board with this, and lo and behold, hey, Democrats don't really want to do it, right? They're boohoo whining crying about being forced to be tougher on crime, that Republicans are forcing them to actually do their damn jobs, okay? So, you know, local elections matter. When people say, oh, there's no difference between the two parties, that's ignorant, right? There's definitely a difference, especially at the local level. Who you vote for at the local level matters. And stories like this are exactly what I'm talking about. Republicans had to step up and force Democrats to do something that they didn't want to do, to force Democrats to protect the public. That should tell you everything you need to know about how important it is to vote at the local level. So let me know what you guys think. Make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. Most importantly, share a Black conservative perspective. Peace.